Wednesday, 12 August 2026. 3 Asia-Pacific AI stories before your first coffee. Manila's Bases Conversion and Development Authority has carved out 1,620 hectares at New Clark City in Tarlac for an AI native industrial zone under the U.S.-led Pax Silica Coalition. But agency president Joshua Binkong confirms the site will not host data centers. Instead, the hub will focus on chip assembly, testing and packaging, electronics manufacturing, and minerals processing. Draft framework documents are moving between Manila and Washington, with the agency targeting closure in 2 to 3 months and a signing in November, while foreign investors would be eligible for land leases of up to 99 years under Republic Act 12252. Why it matters? The Philippines is positioning itself as a back-end semiconductor services node rather than a compute cluster, which reshapes the value proposition for hyperscalers and chip packagers scouting Southeast Asia. Builders in advanced packaging, particularly those diversifying away from concentrated capacity in Taiwan and Malaysia, now have a greenfield option with long tenure certainty. The agency projects up to $70 billion of inbound investment and roughly $200 billion of exports at full build, figures that would dwarf the country's current $84.48 billion in total annual exports. Capital allocators should watch 2 things: whether displacement risks involving an estimated 20,000 residents and 15,000 farmers slow permitting timelines, and whether the no data center restriction holds once regional AI inference demand spikes. So, Seoul is committing 5 trillion won, roughly $3.5 billion, to a new semiconductor fund aimed not at Samsung or SK Hynix, but at the materials, parts, equipment, and fabless firms those 2 champions depend on. A separate 5 trillion won in trade finance for suppliers and a 1 trillion won 10-year cooperation program sit alongside it, all backing a national mega project under which Samsung, SK Hynix, suppliers, and local governments are expected to invest more than $576 billion in total. Why it matters? This is Seoul explicitly shoring up the middle layer of its chip stack, the suppliers and toolmakers that global fabs cannot run without. Fabless designers and equipment makers in Korea now have a dedicated capital pool that did not exist before, which changes the calculus for venture and growth investors sizing up the Korean semiconductor supply chain. The mega special Zone Act Seoul plans to push through this year with fast-track permits, environmental reviews, and infrastructure approvals, with Yongin slated for 14.7 gigawatts of power by 2041 and an 8.3 million square meter military airfield at Gwangju being converted for industrial use. The second-order effect to watch: whether this middle layer funding pulls component suppliers away from diversifying into Southeast Asian fabs and locks them deeper into Korean geography, concentrating risk even as it concentrates capability. Now, China's humanoid robot makers shipped over 97% of the roughly 19,100 units sold globally in the first half of 2026, with Chinese buyers absorbing 85% of that output, making the category almost entirely a domestic looper. AGBot led with about 8,400 units for 44% of the global market, overtaking Unitree at roughly 5,900 units and 31%. Full-year shipments are projected at around 60,000 units, generating approximately $1.6 billion in revenue, a modest figure for a category attracting outsized attention from investors and policymakers alike. Why it matters? The numbers confirm that humanoid robotics is, for now, a China-to-China trade rather than a global market. Industrial and commercial buyers took over 70% of shipments, up from about 50% a year earlier, signaling that factories, not consumers, are setting the adoption pace. Korea and Japan barely register as buyers because Hyundai, Samsung, and peers are building captive fleets for their own production lines, rather than purchasing from Chinese vendors. Capital allocators pricing humanoid plays at global scale should note the demand concentration risk. If Chinese industrial policy shifts or subsidies tighten, the entire volume story compresses. The second-order effect to track is whether export controls or tariff walls start targeting humanoid hardware the way they already target semiconductors. That is your AI in Asia briefing for today. Stay sharp, build well, see you tomorrow.